Welcome to the Synthesis of Yoga, the book that changed my life. For those who are new, we are exploring Aurobindo's The Synthesis of Yoga, the book that has synthesized thousands of years of yogic traditions, various schools, what is essential to all of them, and a grand synthesis leading to the creation of integral yoga of Aurobindo. In our last episode, which was 111, that was the ending of the 9th chapter of the part 1. Equality and the annihilation of ego. We have learned the conditions of equality, the samatha, and the growth of consciousness that happens is a result of it, and the ways to arrive at samatha. All that was covered in the last chapter. Today we are moving on to a new chapter, the 10th chapter. It is on the 3 modes of nature, the 3 gunas. And we are reading line by line. And the very act of reading is an immersion in Aurobindo's consciousness so that enters and illumines our inner nature. We are starting with paragraph number 1 of the 10th chapter. There will be a link in the description where you can find where this chapter is. And let's begin. The 3 modes of nature. Episode 112. Paragraph 1. To transcend the natural action of the lower Prakriti is indispensable to the soul. If it is to be free in itself and free in its works. 2 types of freedom. One is be free in itself. Other is freedom in works. Because it is quite possible to enter into the freedom of the pure inner, inmost self, or the higher self, does not mean we have the freedom to engage in the world in the field of action. That is where a different type of freedom enters, and that is where the 3 modes of nature come into picture. And to transcend the natural action of the lower Prakriti. Lower Prakriti is our lower nature, what has already been established in evolution in this material world. To transcend the natural action. So there is a natural action of what has been already established, that is following the existing conditions of harmony. Now, we are looking at transcending that. To transcend the natural action of the lower Prakriti is indispensable to the soul if it is to be free in itself and free in its works. So freedom in the works in this world requires transcending of the lower Prakriti and her natural action. Harmonious subjection to this actual universal nature, a condition of good and perfect work for the natural instruments, is not an ideal for the soul, which should rather be subject to God and His Shakti, but master of its own nature. So there is God and His Shakti, the Supreme and the creative power of the Supreme, behind and above nature. Material nature and what is here on earth evolving, this is part of the lower nature, the veil. Behind it, deep within and above it, transcending it as well as immanent in it, there is the divine and the creative force of the divine. That is moving everything. And soul has two choices. One is harmonious subjection to the universal nature, the actual universal nature that is already established here, working. One can be in harmony with nature as it is, but that is not what the soul's evolution and growth requires. So harmonious subjection to this actual universal nature, a condition of good and perfect work for the natural instruments. Our existing natural instruments requires that harmonious subjection. However, it is for the instruments. It is not an ideal for the soul, which should rather subject to God and His Shakti. So the soul's role is to subject itself to God and Shakti, who is above and deep immersed in this creation. It is that alone can bring the dynamic freedom of the soul here in action, so that this nature is mastered and instruments are mastered from a different poise. So harmonious subjection to this actual universal nature, a condition of good and perfect work for the natural instruments, is not an ideal for the soul, which should rather be subject to God and His Shakti, but master of its own nature. And so on one hand, there is subjecting to God and His Shakti, so that through that there is a mastering of one's own nature. The instrumental nature, the mental, vital, physical nature come into picture. As agent or as channel of the supreme will, it must determine by its vision and sanction or refusal the use that shall be made of the storage of energy, the conditions of environment, the rhythm of combined movement, which are provided by Prakriti for the labor of the natural instruments, mind, life, and body. So these are the three natural instruments, mind, life, and body. And they have a labor. They are laboring. And this labor is activated through a storage of energy that is there. So it must, as agent or as channel of the supreme will. So the soul is an agent of the supreme divine and its will, the Shakti, the creative force. So then agent or as channel of the supreme will, it must determine by its vision and sanction or refusal. Vision, sanction, or refusal. Remember, in our earlier chapters, we have learned that soul waking up and it receives the vision of what is the right thing to do. And in that seeing, the operations of lower nature can be sanctioned or refused. That's where the mastery come in. So it must determine by its vision and sanction or refusal the use that shall be made of the storage of energy, the use that shall be made of the storage of energy. We are instruments with certain reservoir of energy, which is getting released into the material life and its processes. So we are channels through which this stored up energy is getting released, and that release, there is the storage of energy, the conditions of environment. So this release is happening in the conditions of environment, the rhythm of combined movements. Rhythm of combined movements. He's using the word rhythm. When seen from a deeper, larger perspective, all the movements of nature would reveal that rhythm of nature. And combined movement, because there are multiple layers and threads moving together like an orchestra, creating this beautiful symphony of life. There is a rhythm of combined movement which are provided by Prakriti for the labor of the natural instruments, mind, life and body. So these three instruments are laboring, and there is a combined workings, and there is an energy getting released through that. And the soul is standing behind and giving sanction or refusal based on the vision it has. And it is an agent of the Supreme God and the Shakti. So as agent or as channel of the Supreme Will, it must determine by its vision and sanction or refusal the use that shall be made of the storage of energy, the conditions of environment, the rhythm of combined movement, which are provided by Shakti. So the storage of energy, conditions of environment, the rhythm of combined movement, these are all provided by the Prakriti for the labor of the natural instruments, mind, life and body. But this inferior nature can only be mastered if it is surmounted and used from above. So this nature, material nature, vital nature, mental nature, this nature is inferior. It is inferior in the sense it is yet to reveal pure divine harmonies and delight that is possible. It is a potentiality progressively revealing the involved divinity. It is imperfect even when the combined movements of it is rhythmic, harmonious. This inferior nature can only be mastered if she is surmounted and used from above. So there is an ascension beyond this nature's workings that is required, so that you have a poise from above, from where this can be mastered. And this can only be done by a transcendence of her forces, qualities, and modes of action. Otherwise, we are subject to her conditions and helplessly dominated by her, not free in the spirit. So there is a dominant presence of nature and her forces, qualities, modes of action. Here is coming the modes of action. Nature's action, and there are modes through which this action unfolds. And we have to transcend this. So, and this can only be done by a transcendence of her forces, qualities, and modes of action. Forces. There are physical forces, which modern physics is mapping, trying to identify all the fundamental forces of nature and trying to identify one single force behind it. But it is still the physical force they are looking at. Now, behind the physical force is the vital force, behind it is the mental force. And these are the forces. And then they have qualities. Physical force, vital force, mental force, they are all qualitatively different. Then they have modes of action. So, and this can only be done by a transcendence of her forces, qualities, and modes of action. Otherwise, we are subject to their conditions, subjected to her conditions, the conditions of physical, vital, mental nature, and helplessly dominated by her, not free in the spirit. So, freedom of the spirit here in this material life and its processes, if we are to bring in that freedom, first we need to transcend the forces, qualities, and modes of nature. From there, we have a vantage point to enter back into this. The idea of the three essential modes of nature is a creation of the ancient Indian thinkers, and its truth is not at once obvious because it was the result of long psychological experiment and profound internal experience. So, this understanding of the modes of nature, three essential modes of nature, it comes from ancient Indian thinkers, particularly those who are coming from the Sankhya school of Indian ancient exploration. And in India, the exploration had been from the subjective and intersubjective domain. It was not the objective way of exploring, but exploration into one's own psychology, mastering the forces of thoughts, emotions, sensations, energy. And it is through that they have discovered the modes of nature. And this is a long tradition, and there is its methodology of knowing, which is fundamentally different from modern scientific exploration, which is of an external measurement based. But the modality of validation through peer reviews and all that, there was an equivalent of ancient rishis doing their inner exploration, discovering the truths, comparing with other seers, seekers. And in that exploration and analysis and understanding, they have found these three essential modes of nature, which is otherwise not very obvious to our normal perception of nature and her workings. The idea of the three essential modes of nature is a creation of the ancient Indian thinkers, and its truth is not at once obvious because it was the result of long psychological experiment and profound internal experience. So it is coming from that inner experience, internally experiencing. Here we should also remember that when you say inner, it need not necessarily be limited to you as a small individual, because what these ancient explorers discovered is when you go inward, from there is an expansion into the universal, and you are in a way exploring the universal nature, and subjective and objective begins to merge. Therefore, without a long inner experience, without intimate self-observation, and intuitive perception of nature forces, it is difficult to grasp accurately or firmly utilize. So first, we ourselves need to go through this long inner experience, and without that, as well as without intimate self-observation, very intimate self-observation, It is intimate because it is flowing through us like a river. Nature's forces, mental forces, vital forces, physical forces, they are flowing in us through like a river. And it is taking us to this vast ocean of cosmic nature. And experience is intimate because we are one with it. We experience it subjectively within us. Therefore, without a long inner experience, without intimate self-observation, and intuitive perception of nature forces. Intuitive perception. In intuition, there is a direct knowing without having to go through analytical, logical, rational thinking. Our normal way of understanding things is, in a current stage of human evolution, through the mind that has to receive it through senses. Then that sensory data is analyzed and you arrive at knowledge. Whereas in this intuitive, direct way, there is this direct inner subjective contact with the forces of nature, and it is flowing through you. It is through that intuitive perception where it is an experience, not a product of analysis. That experience, it even transcends the senses. Beyond the senses, directly in immersion into the inner world using inner senses. It is through that there is an intuitive perception of nature forces. It is difficult to grasp accurately or firmly utilize. Without this long inner experience and self-observation and intuitive perception of nature forces, it is difficult to grasp these three modes accurately, and even more difficult to use it. We are discovering the modes of nature not just for the joy of knowing it, but also to utilize it in our yogic journey of evolution of consciousness. Still, certain broad indications may help the seeker on the way of works to understand, analyze, and control by his assent or refusal the combinations of his own nature. So it's coming back again, assent or refusal. There is a part in us that can allow or refuse the movements of nature through us, in us. And these modes have their combinations that are working through us. Mental, vital, physical, there is a joint, combined workings of it. And we can have certain broad indications that may help the seeker on the way of works. Way of works. Here again, we are looking at this whole journey from the perspective of the way of works. And there are schools of thought in India where often they consider the way of works only as a preliminary purification through action. And ultimate purpose is ending of all action and merging into the formless and renouncing the world altogether, rejecting the world altogether. That's not the perspective what we have. It is the way of works, and in that context, freedom, creative freedom of the divine brought here into earth for a life divine. That's our context. Seeker on the way of works to understand, analyze, and control. So we need to understand the modes of nature, analyze the modes of nature, and control the modes of nature by his assent or refusal, the combinations of his own nature, combinations of his own nature, our physical nature, vital nature, mental nature. These modes are termed in the Indian books qualities, Gunas, and are given the names Sattva, Rajas, Tamas. These are the three Sanskrit terms: Sattva, Rajas, Tamas. It originally comes from the Sankhya school. That is the time analytical mind emerged, and it was dissecting the process of nature, identifying various components of human psychology, and they have classified the general nature to have these three modes: Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas. Sattva is the force of equilibrium and translates in quality as good and harmony and happiness and light. This is the first one, Sattva, force of equilibrium, and translates in quality. It's, on one hand, it is a force of equilibrium. Subjectively, it brings qualitative experience of good, harmony, happiness, and light. So Sattva brings these qualities: good, harmony, happiness, and light. Rajas is the force of kinesis, dynamism. Rajas is the force of kinesis and translates in quality as struggle and effort, passion and action. So the dynamic force of nature, it gives us the subjective experience of struggle and effort, passion and action. That's the contribution of Rajas. Tamas is the force of inconscience and inertia and translates in quality as obscurity and incapacity and inaction. So, Tamas, as a force, it is coming from inconscience and inertia. It is the most mechanical part. And therefore, in physics, we see the laws of motion, which is discovered by Newton, even where he sees everything moves and continues in state of rest or motion unless it is impacted by something else. That's inertia. Things continue as it is. And Tamas is the force of inconscience and inertia and translates in quality as obscurity and incapacity and inaction. This is what brings incapacity, obscurity, inaction, our very passive state of being where no action is happening. And there is incapacity, and there is also obscurity. There is no clarity, no perception, no illumination. So that's the state, like a stone, dull. So let's read this. This is the seed of the three gunas. Sattva is the force of equilibrium and translates in quality as good, harmony, and happiness and light. Rajas is the force of kinesis and translates in quality as struggle and effort, passion and action. Tamas is the force of inconscience and inertia and translates in quality as obscurity and incapacity and inaction. So there is a qualitative inner subjective experience of these forces. That is how we recognize their presence and eventually utilize them. Ordinarily used for psychological self-analysis, these distinctions are valid also in physical nature. So, these are the two sides. Ordinarily used for psychological self-analysis. That's how we start. Observing our inner subjective state, whether it is sattvic, rajasic or tamasic. This is first thing to understand. But this very modes of nature These distinctions are valid also in physical nature, the outer physical nature that we experience. There also these modes are applicable and present. This is what animates them. And nature is going through the cycles of these processes. Each thing and every existence in the lower Prakriti contains in them, and its process and dynamic form are the result of the interaction of these qualitative powers. Qualitative powers. And they interact. And as the result of this interaction creates the process and dynamic form. So each thing and every existence, whether we human or non-human, each thing and every existence in the lower Prakriti contains them. These three modes are contained within every existence, everything that is in existence. And its process and dynamic form are the result of the interactions of these qualities and powers. So we see ourselves as a form, but we are not a static form. We are a dynamic form, a form that is constantly modifying itself incrementally. When we see an ocean, a wave rising, it is a form, but it's a dynamic form and rapidly changing. We too are such waves rolled out from the ocean of cosmic nature. And we are a dynamic form, and it has its process. So this process and dynamic form are the result of the interaction of these qualitative powers. Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas. These three qualitative powers intermix and create the process and the resultant dynamic form that we see. Whether it is a stone, a plant, a human being, and within the human being, the solidity of the body, the dynamic rush of the vital energy, and the lucid clarities of the mind, all that are combinations and operations of these three gunas. Every form of things, whether animate or inanimate, is constantly maintained poise of natural forces in motion and is subject to an unending stream of helpful, disturbing, or disintegrating contacts from other combinations of forces that surrounds it. So we have different forms. Even if you take human beings, we are more than 8 billion. Now, each one of them are a combination of these three gunas and its stable process and dynamic form. And they are constantly interacting. So, on one hand, there is an interaction of three modes within a single individual. And when such individuals interact with each other, there is a further multiplication through that contact. Now, that contact is continuous because we are constantly interacting with people and everything else in nature, forces of nature, whether it is wind, sunlight, heat, rain, water, all that. There is a constant interaction happening with nature. So every form of things, whether animate or inanimate, so we are not distinguishing between the living forms and non-living. Everything is combination of these three qualities. So every form of things, whether animate or inanimate, is a constantly maintained poise of natural forces in motion because nature's forces are never at rest. It's a force in motion, whether subatomic whirlings or galactic whirlings, and everything in between. Nature's forces are always in motion and is subject to an unending stream of helpful, disturbing, or disintegrating contacts. So every form is interacting with everything else. Even galaxies are colliding. Here on Earth, our individual lives are colliding with other lives. And there is a constant exchange. And this unending stream of contacts, it could be disintegrating, disturbing, or helpful. So every interaction could be helpful, or it could be disturbing, or it may even disintegrate you from the outer other combinations of forces that surrounds it. So everything else around us is also a combination of these three forces. With the interaction, there is a possibility of help or disturbance or disintegration. Our own nature of mind, life, and body is nothing else than such a formative combination and poise. So what we experience as our mind, its unique set of knowledge, memories, ideas, and the way it functions, its processes, as well as the life energy, its likes, dislikes, sensations, reactions, possibilities, as well as the body, its formation, its habits, its capacities, everything. Our own nature of mind, life, and body is nothing else than such a formative combination and poise. So it's a combination of Sattva, Rajas, Tamas, and it has a poise. It has a stable, combined working. In the reception of the environing contacts and the reaction to them, the three modes determine the temper of the recipient and the character of the response. So here, in the reception of the environing contacts, so there is no way for us to exist without receiving the energies, the contacts, the forces from the surrounding life, surrounding existence, surrounding forms. So while receiving, we have reaction to them. How do we receive? How do we react? These two things are governed by these three modes. So two things are happening: reception and reaction, the response. This is constantly happening. In the reception of the environing contacts and the reaction to them, the three modes determine the temper of the recipient and the character of the response. The temper, the way an individual receives the contacts. And there is a characteristic behavior that is largely habit driven. And these habitual responses is what we call character normally in a person. The temper of the recipient and the character of the response. Inert and inapt, he may suffer them without any responsive reaction, any motion of self-defense, or any capacity of assimilation and adjustment. This is the mode of Tamas, the way of inertia. So, it is quite possible that we suffer the contacts, the exchange, without any responsive action. There is no response at all. And we can see people who are non-responsive. Like when you're interacting with someone, you expect response from the other. When there is no response, when the person is too passive. We don't know what is going on, right? So there is, without any responsive reaction, sometimes we don't react. We can hold back the reaction, but that is conscious one. There is a passive state where there is no reaction at all. By motion of self-defense, there is not even a defending motion or any capacity of assimilation. So when something is pouring in, are you in a position to assimilate it? First of all, reception and assimilation. When the mode is tamasic, there is very little capacity for reception and assimilation. It is way too dull and passive. Only when there is a capacity for reception and assimilation, then only an adjusting response can be made. But the tamasic modality has none of this. It is extremely passive, even in its reception. Even if there is an assimilation, it is extremely passive assimilation, very narrow, very limited. So inert and inapt, he may suffer them without any responsive action, any motion of self-defense, or any capacity of assimilation and adjustment. This is the mode of tamas, the way of inertia. And way of inertia is not the strategic restraint with which someone waits without any reaction. That's something else. That is very, very different. A tamasic inertness, incapacity is very different from a conscious strategic restraint that holds back reactions, responses, silently assimilates and take action at the right time. That's very different. Here we are looking at a tamasic, non-responsive, non-defensive passivity, an incapacity for reception, assimilation, and adaptation. A stone is an example. Passive. It is the external forces that is hitting on it, rolling it, and eventually a rock getting polished and becoming a beautiful, fine pebble over a long stretch of time. External forces are shaping it. Whereas we human beings are conscious, and it is possible to receive, assimilate, respond. But there are people and there are state conditions where we become ourselves passive, unconscious, habitual, obscure. The stigmata of tamas are blindness and unconsciousness and incapacity and unintelligence, sloth and indolence and inactivity, and mechanical routine, and the mind's torpor, and life's sleep, and soul's slumber. So, this is what tamas brings, the stigmata of tamas. The stigma, what the stain brought by tamas is this blindness and unconsciousness. There is no real seeing of what is happening. It is dull and veiled, blindness of unconsciousness. You are not aware what is going on. And incapacity and unintelligence, there is very little capacity. And intelligence is not at all bright, dumb, it's dull. Sloth and indolence and inactivity. So, this is typical tamas, sloth, indolence, inactivity, and mechanical routine. Even when someone looks like actively going around with life, but it is a mechanical routine without any progressive movement. And in that, there is mind's torpor. Mind is in that tamasic, dull sleep. It cannot respond. It is tired. There is a torpor. And life's sleep, life energy is sleeping. In sleep is its action. and souls slumber. So Sri Aurobindo is bringing in three different parts here. So body is of the nature of tamas. And that tamas is affecting the mind, and mind becomes slumber. There is a torpor of the mind. And when tamas is in the life energy, there is life, sleeping life. And then there is soul within, that is slumber. It is in deep sleep, oblivious of all things that are happening around. So this is the result of tamas. In its effect, if uncorrected by other elements, can be nothing but disintegration of the form or the poise of the nature without any new creation or new equilibrium or force of kinetic progress. So this tamas, the force of inertia, goes round and round in circles, very conservative in its movement, preserves the old movements. It cannot open itself to progress. Kinetic progress, a very dynamic progress towards a new equilibrium. So every time progress is to be made, a previous equilibrium is disturbed, and then you chaotically move towards a new equilibrium and then stabilize in the new orbit. That's how the change happens. Whereas when you are under the grip of tamas, there is no such drive to progress, no kinetic drive for progress. So you are in a kind of stable equilibrium, but conservative inertia going round and round in circles and progressively degenerating, disintegrating, fossilizing, dying. And that's what happens in nature. Everything newly created, there's a fresh breath of spirit, new things are created. Slowly it becomes habit, fossilite, become custom, loses its original creative force. So its effect, if uncorrected by other elements are rajas and sattva. If tamas is left to itself, its effect, if uncorrected by other elements, can be nothing but disintegration of the form. So we can see before the death, people enter into this state of inertia and incapacity. As the aging sets in, your dynamism weakens, and even illuminations are fading away, obscurity sets in, and increasing obscurity, hardening of the habits, inability, weakening, and disintegration of form. Can be nothing but disintegration of the form or the poise of the nature without any new creation. Nature can continue in a stable condition without any new creation or new equilibrium or force of kinetic progress. Just kind of a dull, stable, conservative society is a result of such dominance of tamas. At the heart of this inert impotence is the principle of ignorance and an inability or slothful unwillingness to comprehend, seize, and manage. The stimulating or assailing contact, the suggestion of environing forces, and their urge towards fresh experience. So what is impinging from outside, the outer contacts, is actually a tremendous means to progress, because it is something that stimulates you. The contacts that are coming from outside, it is a stimulation, the stimulating or assailing contact, the suggestion of environing forces and their urge towards fresh experience. So there is a pressing down upon every individual from the surrounding life to progress. And we can see that in today's world with hyperactive social media, hyperactive marketing, hyperactive market forces, stimulating all the masses to come, buy this, progress, this is something better, we have a new product, new service, enjoy this better experience. This sense of fresh experience, a drive to progress, this is one of the characteristic developments of modern society. Earlier societies, there were always pockets of people who were untouched and living in their deep conservative inertia. Whereas today, globally, the entire humanity is constantly stimulated by an extremely rajasic, active market force and forcing everyone for fresh experience, seek new experience, new adventure. This is a stamp of modern life. Often to the excess of disintegration, overstimulation, but from the perspective of coming out of Tamas, it is doing a great job. At the heart of this inert impotence is the principle of ignorance and an inability or slothful unwillingness to comprehend, seize, and manage. So, there is an importance in inertia, the dullness. And it's a principle of ignorance. And from there comes an inability and slothful unwillingness to comprehend, seize, and manage. Because external contacts are anyway pouring in. Can you comprehend them, seize them, manage them? Now, in today's world, AI is being unleashed. Now, organizations and individuals who are able to comprehend, seize, and manage, they will thrive. Those who are tamasic, inert, and unable to comprehend, seize, and manage will be wiped out, will disintegrate and die away. These external forces are also pushing the evolution. At the heart of this inert impotence is the principle of ignorance and an inability or slothful unwillingness. There is unwillingness even to comprehend, seize, and manage. The stimulating or assailing contact, the suggestion of environing forces, and their urge towards fresh experience. And today, entire humanity is intensely stimulated. No individuals can escape this stimulant. Either you comprehend, assimilate, and manage and progress, or disintegrate by the intensity of external stimulation. Tamas is globally getting washed away. But the very nature of tamas, one can detect, it is this very inability and slothful unwillingness, a principle of ignorance. On the other hand, the recipient of nature's contact, touched and stimulated, solicited or assailed by her forces, may react to the pressure or against it. So that's the next step. The Rajas slowly waking up and say, I react to it and even work against the stimulus that has come. So on the other hand, the recipient of nature's contacts, touched and stimulated. So nature's hands are coming from outside and touching and stimulating. Solicited or assailed by her forces, whether you solicit, receive happily, or assailed by her forces, may react to the pressure or against it. So, second mode is the ability to react or even work against the stimulation. She allows, encourages, impels him to strive, to resist, to attempt, to dominate or engross his environment, to assert his will, to fight and create and conquer. That is where Rajas is coming in. This is the mode of Rajas, the way of passion and action, and the thirst of desire. So in the evolutionary process, desire was introduced to wake up this sleeping life, to enter into this arena of exchange. So she allows, encourages, impels him to strive, to resist, to attempt to dominate. You can resist the internal contacts from our other lives, to attempt to dominate. You can also dominate or engross his environment, to assert his will, to fight and create and conquer. All these are the contribution of the Rajasic nature. So when people become adventurous, going out to explore, you need that kinetic force of Rajas in you. Without it, you will not be able to step out of the comfort zone. Inertia binds you in the comfort zone. Rajas takes you out of the comfort zone. Like European colonization of the world happened through such a massive intensity of Rajasic adventure that took them across the world, a massive exploration. This is the mode of Rajas, the way of passion and action, and the thirst of desire to explore, to conquer. All that is brought by Rajas. Struggle and change and new creation, victory and defeat and joy and suffering and hope and disappointment are its children, and build the many-colored house of life in which it takes its pleasure. So this Rajas takes its pleasure in this many-colored house of life, where this full spectrum of what we call in India the masala of life, the navarasas of life, where the victory and defeat and joy and suffering and hope and disappointment, all these are the children of Rajas. Struggle and change and new creation, all this is part of that Rajasic dynamic kinetic energy, are its children, and build the many-colored house of life. Many-colored house of life. This Rajas brings tremendous vitality, tremendous diversity, tremendous colored drama of life, in which it takes pleasure. But its knowledge is an imperfect or false knowledge. It has some knowledge, but it is an imperfect and false knowledge. Unlike Tamas, which is very ignorant, very hardly knowing, Rajas has its instinctive knowledge of how to deal with other life forms. But it's an imperfect and false knowledge. But its knowledge is an imperfect or false knowledge, and it brings with it ignorant effort, error, a constant misadjustment, pain of attachment, disappointed desire, grief of loss and failure. And we can see that many people, when they have this dominance of Rajasic tendency, that's when they rashly take decisions, jump into action, initiate new projects. And then you see that there was an error, extra effort required, struggle, and a constant misadjustment, because you realize that, oh, that decision was wrong, I jumped into the wrong boat and now I have to correct. Then sometimes the pain of attachment, I have put so much effort already into this, and now how do I drop this and move on to something else? There is an attachment, because a Rajasic impulsion led you to invest your time and energy into something and you get attached to it. So there is a pain of attachment that comes with it. Then disappointed desire. Desire moved you forward into action and you jumped into action, but that action did not yield result. So the desire is disappointed. And grief of loss and failure. And when you don't get what you don't get, or what you desired for, and when you fail, there's a grief and loss. So all these are the typical contributions of the Rajasic nature. And those who are Rajasic by nature tend to do this repeatedly, in spite of failing. They keep repeating this error of jumping from one thing to other with all its drama and excitement, hopes and desires, and then the failures and grief and disappointments, and on the other hand, attachment to what you have already created and all that. Then constantly adjusting, correcting, changing. This is the story of Rajas. The gift of Rajas is kinetic force, energy, activity. The power that creates and acts and can overcome, but it moves in the wrong lights or the half lights of the ignorance. Ignorance here is capital I, universal ignorance. And it is perverted by the touch of the asura, rakshasa and pisacha. So on one hand, the Rajas brings the kinetic force, energy, activity. And this is what helps us, the power that creates and acts, and this is the power that enables us to overcome whatever be the challenges that are in front of us. Any obstacle, overcoming obstacle, will require tremendous energy, and Rajas brings that. But it moves in the wrong light or half lights of the ignorance. Rajas has no true light. And it is perverted by the touch of asura, rakshasa and pisacha. The self-centered, egoistic nature. Out of that comes the asuras, rakshasas and pisachas. These are the vocabulary of ancient Indian stories, Puranic stories, where we see the asuras, rakshasas, pisachas. So these forces are the forces that are actually bound by ignorance and ego and driven by its desire, its self-assertion. It is not in harmony with the larger whole. It wants to conquer everything for itself. And with that comes the perversion. So Rajas is prone to be perverted by the asura, rakshasa and pisacha. The arrogant ignorance of the human mind and its self-satisfied perversions and presumptuous errors, the pride and vanity and ambition, the cruelty and tyranny and beast wrath and violence, the selfishness and baseness and hypocrisy and treachery and vile meanness, the lust and greed and rapacity, the jealousy, envy and bottomless ingratitude that disfigure the earth nature are the natural children of this indispensable but strong and dangerous turn of nature. On one hand, this force is indispensable, but it's dangerous. It's like having fire and gunpowder for children to play. Fire is indispensable for the growth, but it is very dangerous when it is not mastered, because it can bring all this arrogant ignorance of the human mind. Arrogance comes with rajas. And its self-satisfied perversions, when the desires become intense and no control over it, and the pisacha takes over it, then there is the perversions of that rajasic nature. Presumptuous errors, the pride and vanity of ambition. So the rajas brings this tendency of heightened ambition for conquest, and also the vanity of your own glory. The cruelty and tyranny, this is another byproduct of it. Cruelty. In order to accomplish your goal, you are willing to be cruel and be a tyrant. Beast wrath and violence. All this happens under the grip of tamas. The selfishness and baseness, naturally. Selfishness, baseness, hypocrisy and treachery. Treachery. The vile meanness. The lust and greed and rapacity. The jealousy, envy and bottomless ingratitude. What we see portrayed in the masala of movie theater of the world. The jealousies, envies, bottomless ingratitude, lust, greed, rapacity, selfishness, baseness, hypocrisy, all that. The whole melodrama that we see. These are that disfigure the earth nature, are the natural children of this indispensable but strong and dangerous turn of nature. From tamas, there is this rajas, emergence of rajas, the life force, rajasic, kinetic. We need it, but it's a dangerous wild horse. Without taming, it can be extremely destructive. But the embodied being is not limited to these two modes of Prakriti, tamas and rajas. There is a better and more enlightened way in which he can deal with surrounding impacts and the stream of the world forces. So there is a third force, that is the Sattva. A better and more enlightened way in which he can deal with surrounding impacts and stream of the world forces. So the world forces, they are streaming into you. How do you receive? How do you assimilate? How do you respond? Can you do it better? Tamasic force, tamasic nature has very little capacity for reception, assimilation and response. It's dull and obscure. Rajasic nature is dynamic, kinetic. It receives, reacts, assimilates, competes, struggles, but based on a limited knowledge, a limited understanding, and do it violently, aggressively. Whereas Sattva brings a new quality of an enlightened way. There is possible a reception and reaction with clear comprehension, poise and balance. This is possible, there is possible a reception and reaction with clear comprehension, poise and balance. Clear comprehension, poise and balance. We may be listening to some talks and we see that we are attentive. And when you're attentive, there is a possibility of reception. You're consciously listening, deeply listening so that you can comprehend the words, receive it, assimilate it. But the moment there is inertia steps in, dullness steps in, tiredness walks into you, that attentiveness is gone. When this attentiveness is gone, there is inability to receive, hear, be present. So we can see how this works very easily. There is possible a reception and reaction with clear comprehension and poise and balance. All the contacts of life can be received and responded to with comprehension, poise, and the right balance. This way of natural being has the power that because it understands, sympathizes. So sympathy comes from understanding. Without understanding, there is no sympathy. So this is one of the very first gift Sattva brings, sympathy. Sympathy towards other life beings that are around, with whom we are interacting. There is a reception, there is an understanding, there is a sympathy. It fathoms and controls and develops nature's urge and her ways. So this sattvic nature fathoms, controls and develops nature's urge and her ways. So it's not only that it is able to receive, assimilate, control, it also develops. What you receive from the surrounding life, even what you receive through this podcast, you receive it, you assimilate it, and you develop it further in your journey. It doesn't stay static. It can grow, and that's what Sattva brings. Develops nature's urge and her ways. So there is nature working through you, shaping you as an instrument. And in that process, there is this voice of this podcast entering you. And there is an attentive reception, assimilation, and it is part of the nature's urge which is receiving, and you can develop that urge further. It has an intelligence that penetrates her processes and her significances and can assimilate and utilize. There is a lucid response that is not overpowered, but adjusts, corrects, adapts, harmonizes, elicits the best in all things. This is the beauty of sattvic nature. It has an intelligence that penetrates her process and her significances. Nature is pouring into you from all sides. And sattvic poise brings the intelligence and it penetrates into what material you have received. Behind it, what is the process of nature? What is the significance of what you have received? And then it can assimilate and utilize. There is a lucid response that is not overpowered. So the response is not coming from an overpowered state, but there is a adjusting, correcting, adapting, harmonizing movement that elicits the best in all things. All the contacts from outside, there is good and bad in all that, everything. And sattvic nature is able to tune into what is the best in what is coming to you and receive it. If you look at India, that was colonized by Great Britain. Now, European contact was a massive intervention into India that was in tamasic torpor, sleep. And India slowly wakes up, and in that process, it adjusts, corrects, adapts, harmonizes, and receives the best, because European contact also brought the power of rational intelligence. India had the power of tremendous rational intelligence and creative capacity, but it was lost and India was in sleep. So the contact with the modern European life and the modern science, the power of thinking came back. And then the dynamic creative force. Now we see India rising up and her vitality growing, the rajasic capacities being mastered. From Tamas, India is moving into rajas, and sattvic balance is beginning to emerge. So there is a lucid response that is not overpowered, but adjusts, corrects, adapts, harmonizes, elicits the best in all things. So Sattva has the ability to receive the best from all the contacts. This is the mode of Sattva, the turn of nature that is full of light and poise, directed to good, to knowledge, to delight and beauty, to happiness, right understanding, right equilibrium, right order. Its temperament is the opulence of a bright clearness. Opulence of a bright clearness. What a beautiful phrase. Opulence of a bright clearness of knowledge and a lucent warmth of sympathy and closeness. Remember, sympathy comes from understanding. A sattvic nature, therefore, has the compassion. That's why as the world is becoming more and more sattvic, more and more people are talking about compassion, understanding other people, understanding other life forms, having sympathy, empathic understanding, compassion. So from that comes the turn of nature that is full of light and poise, directed to good. Good of people, good of animals, good of earth, good of life. And turn towards knowledge. Understanding better. How do I improve my knowledge? Progress. Scientific progress requires that sattvic mind. To delight and beauty, the art, culture, literature, all the creation comes from that. To happiness, right understanding, right equilibrium, right order. So individual happiness, collective happiness, from there, right understanding, right equilibrium, right order of the society. So the social reorganizing, everything comes from that sattvic quality. Its temperament is the opulence of a bright clearness of knowledge and a loosened warmth of sympathy and closeness. This is the gift of the great thinkers who brings that lucent clarity to humanity. A fineness and enlightenment, a governing energy, an accomplished harmony and poise of the whole being is the consummate achievement of the sattvic nature. So sattvic nature, a fineness and enlightenment, very refined qualities. Governed energy. Your energy is not excited, running around out of excitement. It is governed. An energy that is under mastery. And it can release the force as and when it is required. It can hold back. It is in full control. Unlike rajasic nature, it reacts violently to things. It is out of control. It has no mastery over the forces. Whereas sattvic nature has the mastery. Rajasic nature reacts. So, a governed energy, an accomplished harmony. There is a stabilized harmony, not occasional harmony, a stabilized, accomplished harmony, and poise of the whole being. Its physical, vital, mental nature, everything is accomplished, harmonized, stabilized, is the consummate achievement of the sattvic nature. There is tamasic nature. Individuals who are extremely tamasic are incapable of learning anything new, dull, obscure. Intelligence is dull, incapable of learning, and it goes on repeating habits, conservative inertia. Then there is a rajasic type of people, excited about things, running around out of excitement, rush into things, regret, grieve, fight, all the cravings, desires, attachments, everything. They go through the turmoil of life. Kinetic, rajasic type. Then there is the sattvic people who are established the harmony within themselves of the rajas and tamas, all are harmonized, and energy is contained, mind is illumined, bright, and able to navigate through life with great sympathy, empathy, clarity, compassion. So that's the third nature, sattva. So we covered now all three types, sattva, rajas, tamas. These are the three modes of nature. So with it, we come to the end of this first episode of this chapter. Please do share your insights, observations, suggestions for improvement. Thank you and see you next week.